please, Mr. Minister. Good morning, everyone. I'm Damon Wilson, Executive Vice President of the Atlantic Council, and I'm delighted to welcome you back to day 2 of GLOBSEC for a very special kickoff of this day with a keynote that I think we're all very much looking forward to. This session on the front line of the war will feature remarks from our distinguished guests that we have with us right now, the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs and Expatriates of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, His Excellency Nasser Judeh. Thank you so much for being with us here in Bratislava. Thank you for making the time to come to Central Europe for this conversation. I want to add a special thanks because the minister recently hosted an Atlantic Council delegation in Amman headed by Secretary Albright and Steve Hadley, who will be joining us shortly during this day for a real look at a longer-term strategy in the Middle East. And part of the reason they were in Amman is part of the reason why we're looking forward to your conversation today. Jordan is one of our key strategic partners in the region, a real anchor of stability in a region of turmoil, leading partner in the anti-ISIS coalition. We're in the midst of a very important partnership between the United States and Jordan that is backed up by about $1 billion a year in that partnership. And Jordan is among the most active partners that the Alliance has in the Middle East and certainly in the Mediterranean dialogue. Jordan's participated in the NATO response force, has had contributions to operations in Bosnia, Afghanistan, and Libya. And I think we've seen this even stepping up. At the beginning of April, we've seen the beginning of NATO training Iraqi forces in Jordan and that process beginning, and King Abdullah's visit to NATO headquarters in March of this year as well. But we're also looking forward to this conversation because Jordan has really been bearing the brunt of the crisis in Syria, bearing the brunt of the refugees. And I think it's important for this region, where there's been a debate about that, to understand and appreciate the scale of the refugee crisis and what it means in Jordan. I think we'll hear about that from the minister. So with that, I want to introduce the minister and invite him to offer his thoughts. The minister has served as foreign minister, deputy prime minister since 2009. His previous positions have been extensive in Jordan, having served as official spokesperson for the government, Minister of State for Media and Communications, has had time working in the private sector, served as a Minister of Information, Director General of Jordanian Radio and TV Corporation, Director of the Jordanian TV, extensive background representing Jordan internationally. And Mr. Minister, thank you so much, and we look forward to your remarks.
Thank you very much, my friend, for your introduction, your kind words, your extensive information that you provided with our distinguished audience here. It's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you very much, Ambassador Katcher. Thank you very much, Mr. Vass. Thank you very much to my good friend, General Allen. And it's so wonderful to look around this hall and see so many familiar faces, old friends, and I look forward to making some new ones. I'm extremely honored and humbled to be invited to this distinguished forum, GLOBSEC. I wish this forum more success in the future. I'm sure that with the trajectory that they're on and the momentum that they have established over the last few years, they're going to be an extremely important forum on the map of our collective discussions on global security in different parts of the world. So best of luck, and again, many, many thanks for inviting me, and I look forward to more engagement and interaction with this forum and its distinguished participants. So on the front line of war, a description given to the topic of our conversation this morning, perhaps very, very true, but I would like to start by, and by the way, I'm not going to be reading off a script. I thought it's better to just have a heart-to-heart conversation about the challenges that we face as an international community. So with that in mind, I'd like to say that we're all on the front line of war. We're all on the front line of the common challenges that we face as humanity, as an international community. And I keep saying, when it comes to the challenges and when it comes to the responsibility that we all have in different areas, particularly talking about the refugees. It's no longer a question of it's their problem. I said that to many friends yesterday in private conversations and today as we are preparing for this. In the past, maybe an escape mechanism would be that it's their problem, it's not ours, or it's our problem, it's not theirs. I think today, as we face these challenges, it's our collective problem. Whatever it is that we're talking about is our problem, and we have to talk about these challenges as our problem, our collective problem, and deal with them. When it comes to refugees, and I'll come to that in greater detail later on, you cannot say that we are one international community using the singular, and one member of that international community has to bear the brunt, as our kind host has said, while the other members are looking on. It's a question that we have to look at together if we are going to continue using the singular. Otherwise, let's call each other international communities and just move on rather than just one international community. Let me talk about what I feel from our perspective in Jordan are the main components of the threat that global security faces today. So I start, of course, with the obvious, which is the fight against terrorism and extremism, extremist ideology. And again, there is no one front line. The world at large is the front line. Let's look at some of the major attacks that took place between 2014 and 2016. And the memory is still vivid and alive. But if you look at Indonesia, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, Syria, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Bahrain, Yemen, Turkey, Egypt, Libya, Tunisia, Algeria, France, Belgium, Canada, the US, all of these countries witnessed tragic and heinous attacks in the last 18 or 19 months. I mentioned a few, I didn't mention all. I mean, many other countries have had to face these cowardly attacks targeting civilians, women, children. Again, terrorism and extremism knows no borders, no geographic borders. It knows no race, no religion. Everybody is a target, and that's why we have to deal with this collectively. His Majesty King Abdullah II described the fight against terrorism and extremism as a third world war by other means. Now, if you look at Daesh in particular, and you bear in mind the fact that there are 90+ nationalities, foreign fighters as such, fighting alongside Daesh, and 60+ countries fighting against Daesh, it can not be described as anything but a third world war or a global war that we all have to be part of and that we all have to fight effectively in total sync and in total coordination. But it's not just a military fight. It's not just a discussion over security and strategies, military strategies and plans. It's a comprehensive, holistic approach that is required to fight this fight effectively. And let me tell you what I feel are feeding or fueling terrorism and extremism as we see it today. Of course, there's the ideology, the people who are convinced that what they're doing is right, and of course what they're doing is exactly the opposite. It is, yes, a civil war, a fight within Islam, because these criminals are distorting the image of a noble, extremely tolerant religion that believes in dialogue and openness, and bringing people together rather than making them drift apart. So they're very much in contradiction with the essence of the religion of Islam. And we all know that. And there are no, I mean, as His Majesty once said, they force us Muslims into a corner where we have to defend ourselves and appear and sound as if we're apologetic by saying, no, I'm a moderate Muslim, as opposed to them who happen to be extremist Muslims. By the way, they don't get insulted. The criminals don't get insulted when you call them extremist Muslims, because that's what they want to be. They want to be extremist Muslims, and they force us to say that we're moderates. In Islam, there's no moderate and extremist. There's Islam, which is a moderate religion. So we don't have to find ourselves being defensive about our religion when we know exactly what the message of the religion is and exactly what the religion stands for. But again, apart from the military and the security, you've got to fight the long-term ideological fight. You can't shoot an argument with a bullet. You've got to defeat it with a better argument or with a better idea, and really double, triple, quadruple the efforts to convince people that this is exactly what I said before, a religion of openness and tolerance. Not just tolerance, but acceptance. Tolerance is always associated with something bad. You tolerate something that is unpleasant. Whereas with acceptance, you have to accept the other's ideas, not necessarily agree with them, but accept them as ideas that you have to respect. Now, again, what fuels terrorism and extremism? Unresolved conflicts is certainly an area that we all have to look at and address. If you look at the conflicts that the world faces, and again, I'm not just saying our region, because the ripple effects and the repercussions of these conflicts are felt and they resonate across the global community. In Yemen, you still have an open conflict. We're encouraged recently by the fact that there is a cessation of hostilities or a ceasefire of sorts, and that there is a feeling out there that the Gulf Council initiative is the point of reference that people should go back to. And so there are encouraging signs there. In Libya, you have the legitimate government now in place in Tripoli. Again, I'm oversimplifying things because there are many other complications on the ground in both Yemen and Libya, but there are encouraging signs that things are heading in the right direction. So for the longest time, we've been saying that this legitimate government has to be in Tripoli, has to get to Tripoli. They got to Tripoli now. And it is, I saw the prime minister of the legitimate government in Istanbul the day before yesterday, and he seems encouraged that hopefully the parliament will convene and endorse this government, and that the process of, some people say reconstruction of Libya. In Libya, it's a question of construction, not reconstruction. There were no institutions. I mean, the institutions have been absent for the last 40 years. And so you've got to build them from scratch, not rebuild them. And this makes the task actually much more difficult, much more cumbersome, but it's doable. Once you have the political umbrella, the cover, sitting in place with legitimate grassroots, that the task becomes easier. So, hopefully, resolvable conflicts in Yemen and in Libya. There are signs that the Iraqis are trying. There are difficulties facing the formation of the new cabinet, but I think an inclusive political process in Iraq will go a long way towards putting out the ethnic and sectarian fires that we saw spreading and gaining wind as we have seen in the last few years. So Iraq is very, very important. Then I come to Syria. An ongoing conflict now entering or having entered its sixth year. We have a multitude of UN Security Council resolutions, ending with 2254, of course, which is a very, very important resolution that was adopted in December, followed by 2268, etc. But you have parameters. You have an international community that has agreed consensually on the fact that you have to have a cessation of hostilities, and it's holding, whether we like it or not, whether we see violations on a daily basis or not, but it's holding as a political agreement. It is holding practically on the ground to a large extent. It's holding. There are violations on both sides, but the cessation of hostilities is there, and everybody's committed to it. You have resumption of negotiations. We're entering the third round in Geneva as we speak. I mean, they've had informal consultations over the last couple of days, but today is the formal beginning of the third round of negotiations. What would we like to see? We were talking yesterday. I'd like to see direct negotiations, not just proximity and indirect. I mean, they can only go so far. with an intermediary or a special envoy who's doing an excellent job, by the way, Stefan de Mistura. But he's going from one room to another, from one hotel to the other, meeting with the opposition, meeting with the regime. That works at the beginning to lay the ground, but at the end of the day, you need to have direct talks between the two parties themselves. Yes, you will have fights, you will have disagreements, but this is the only way to resolve a conflict with so many different respective convictions regarding the origins of the conflict and the ways to resolve it. But we have parameters. We have clear parameters. We have the ISSG. We have the time frame set by the ISSG and endorsed by the United Nations Security Council, again, Resolution 2254. We have an agreement on cessation of hostilities, we have an agreement on humanitarian access, and we have an agreement on the need to resume negotiations. And they have resumed again for the third time. So you have to have direct negotiations. You have to have a delving into the substance. You have to start talking about the transitional period. You have to, you will all, of course, sorry, I'm speaking to an informed audience, so I sometimes don't mention things, but we know that there's a time frame set, which is 18 months, the first 4 to 6 months of which are meant to be the time frame when the transitional governing body is formulated and then takes shape and sits to oversee constitutional reforms and elections, which were meant to be next to each other, parliamentary and presidential. We're seeing the parliamentary taking place as we speak, but and let's see what the results are. So that, again, is encouraging. The fact that you have political agreement on negotiations, political agreement on the political parameters is encouraging. Ladies and gentlemen, as a country that neighbors Syria, I cannot begin to tell you how difficult it is to see a country that is so rich and diverse in history and as a major contributor to human civilization being torn to pieces. You know, the Syrians have never been refugees. Every corner, every street corner in Aleppo is a UNESCO World Heritage site. Churches, synagogues, Muslim mosques. It's heartbreaking to see that happening. But again, we have to make sure that it stops so that we can begin the process of reconstruction, both politically and physically. So we're encouraged by the process that's ongoing right now, and we hope that we will stick to the time frame that was agreed on. I left the Palestinian-Israeli till last, and here we can say last, but by no means least. We in Jordan feel that no matter what happens in our part of the world, no matter how many new crises we witness, this is the core issue, and this is the root cause of much of the instability that we see, not just in our part of the world, but worldwide. This is not a local or regional conflict. This is a global conflict with global ramifications, and everybody knows that. The longest occupation in contemporary history. So long as peace between Palestinians and Israelis eludes us, so long as we are going to continue having lots of problems and much instability, and so long as this conflict will feed into other conflicts. And we're at a juncture where, again, there are no negotiations. There's a political vacuum in the context of the Middle East peace process usually leads to an eruption of violence, and that eruption of violence can be in different geographic locations, north, south, or in the middle. So long as we don't have direct negotiations, we will continue to have unilateral action on the ground taking place, whether it's settlement building or unplanned demonstrations or murders or killings. Or it is very, very important to have negotiations resume, to discuss all issues related to final status. This is not something where you start from scratch again. because we've started from scratch many times in the past. We've made progress, we've achieved traction on the ground. We've failed in certain areas which we should avoid in the future. But there's so much that can be built on, and there's so much that that's at stake here. And Jordan is a stakeholder. Jordan is not an observer, it's not a mediator. We are involved in each and every one of the final status issues, whether it's Jerusalem, where we have the Hashemite custodianship of Christian Muslim holy places for His Majesty the King. We have refugees. Jordan is the largest host of Palestinian refugees in the world. Borders, very much a national security issue for Jordan. Security along those borders, again. Water, which is much more than a bilateral or trilateral discussion, but a multilateral discussion that is needed. I mean, so it is in our national interest to have these talks resume. It was said in the past, and I'm speaking very frankly, that one of the leaders was willing yet not able. The other was able yet not willing. We got to a stage, I think, in the middle of the huge momentum of the US administration's efforts a couple of years ago, where both leaders were willing and able. My biggest fear is to get to a stage where both leaders are unwilling and unable. And this is something that we should really be very worried about, because, like I said, it fuels other conflicts. So that whole cluster of issues that I mentioned, the conflicts that are unresolved, certainly feed into terrorism and extremism. Then we've got to address social, economic, and political deprivation in different countries around the world, not just in our region. If you look at, I mean, these heartbreaking images of the schoolgirls, the video that was published in the last couple of days, the girls who were kidnapped by Boko Haram. I've never seen so much sadness and desperation on the faces of young children ever, because they've been in captivity for 2 years. This notorious criminal who kidnapped them claimed that the Almighty spoke to him at the time and told him to kidnap the schoolgirls, and the Almighty spoke to him again and told him to sell the schoolgirls, and the Almighty spoke to him a third time, and he seems to have a direct line with the Almighty against all the teachings of our respective scriptures. But let me tell you one thing. In an atmosphere where there's zero education, not just poverty, but impoverishment, no political rights whatsoever, brick wall mentality, people believe him. He has credibility. And so this is why when I say we have to address the social, economic, and political challenges that we face in different countries, it is very, very important that we work together on this. There's so many initiatives and so many programs out there that address these challenges, but I think we've got to do it collectively and much more effectively. Social, economic, and political deprivation all lead to despair. Despair always leads to extremism. I mean, this is a rule of thumb type of approach. So, refugees, migration. Now it's no longer our problem, it's our problem, especially given what we've seen over the last year. Yes, it is directly related to conflict. We are, as you said, sir, we are at the receiving end of the worst humanitarian disaster, again, in vivid memory in contemporary history. In Jordan, we have 1.4 million Syrians. That's 21% of our population. No country on the face of this planet, whether it is economically, militarily, or politically mighty, can absorb a 21% increase in its population over a span of 18 months. But we've done it. We've done it because we've done it with great difficulty and still facing difficulty. We've done it simply because we want to stick to our principles, stick to our values, live up to our responsibility as a member of the international community. But hold on, the international community has to, again, come to the rescue of one of its members that's doing something on behalf of the international community. One of the most popular decisions that we can take as a government in Jordan is to close the borders, to say no more, that's it. Nobody is willing to commit suicide simply to appear as if they're doing their bit for the international community. And when you look at Jordan, which is politically stable, thank God, an island of stability as we are described, but again, 21% increase in our population. And again, if you look at really unbearable challenge to the infrastructure and key sectors like water. We are number 2 or number 3 poorest country in the world in terms of water resources. And our water sector is being challenged. Every Syrian refugee that enters Jordan is not carrying a bucket of water on their shoulder. They're tapping into, forgive the pun, tapping into the already meager resources that we have in terms of water. Health, we probably have one of the best health systems in the entire region, but it's overcrowded, stretched to the limit. Education, we've had to go back to a system that we had done away with many years ago, which is the double shifts. Many of our schools now operate a double shift in the afternoon just to accommodate Syrian students. 140,000 new Syrian students in our school system just this last academic year. And we're doing it. And of course, energy. We import 97% of our energy in Jordan. And again, you have a 21% increase in your population. And they're using fuel. I mean, they're not just sitting there, not using heaters or cars or whatever. So we presented this Jordan Compact at the London conference on the 4th of February. And for the first time, we're looking at this not with a hand out, but we're looking at this as something that is the responsibility of the international community. Again, nobody should accept that a country can be put under so much pressure without being aided by the rest of the international community. On the challenges that we have today as a Euromed region, I mean, let me just remind of what His Majesty King Abdullah II said in his op-ed in the Daily Telegraph last December, and I quote, "It has never been clearer that our Euromed neighborhood shares deep common challenges and interests. Events taking place in the Middle East today will shape the security and stability of Europe and the world for decades to come. And also, by extension, events taking place in Europe will shape the destiny of much of what's happening in our part of the world." These terrorists and extremists who are, again, cross-border, as we call them, outlaws of Islam, Khawarij, are taking advantage of the divisions between us, taking advantage of the fact that we are not sitting there talking to each other, taking advantage of the fact that we're looking at one component, not the other. The way to deal with that effectively is to have this holistic approach that I mentioned. Look at the military, look at the ideological, look at the security, look at the social, economic, political deprivation, look at the resolution of conflicts. Really disarm them from the tools that they have to recruit. Because they go to places where there's anarchy, where there's chaos, where there's lawlessness, where there's deprivation, where there's social injustice, where there's an absence of political rights, and of course, where there's a fertile ground for recruitment. Ladies and gentlemen, I took so long, I'm very, very sorry, but I would like to end by saying, thank God that having said all that, with all the challenges that we are facing, yes, we are on the front line of war. Jordan historically has been described as a crossroads of civilizations, and we have been different empires, different civilizations over centuries, but today we stand tall, confident. As I said to General Allen yesterday and my good friends, we are both able and stable. We respect the role that we have in our part of the world. We respect the responsibility that we share with all of you to fight the scourge of war and extremism and terrorism, and we certainly adhere to the principles that guide us as a civilized international community. So again, thank you very much for hosting me today. I look forward to maybe answering some of your questions and benefiting from your insight. Thank you so much again.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister, for those remarks. I mean, you can just hear from the extraordinary survey of issues that he's hit on the challenges we have. We have just a few minutes for a few questions from the audience. I'm going to ask one to kick it off, then I'm going to turn quickly to you. You're here in Central Europe. And I want to drive home the point that you said. 1.4 million Syrian refugees are in Jordan today. 1 in 5 residents of Jordan is Syrian. And this is on top of a population, half of which is already Palestinian refugees as well. And so here in Central Europe, where there's been quite an extensive debate on how to handle the refugee crisis, what is your view of Europe's response to this challenge? What is your view of Europe's response to the refugee crisis, where we've had some skepticism from political leaders in this region, and your view of the recent agreement with Turkey? This is the arrangement that has been hammered out with Turkey on how to bring in an orderly way an approach to this refugee crisis. I think for this audience, understanding the scale of the problem and how Jordan has managed this, being stable and able, I think it would be useful to hear your view on how the refugee crisis has been handled by Europe.
Thank you. I mean, I suddenly felt extraterrestrial. I mean, I just had something.
I prolonged my question for you, so...
I just had this thing landing on my head.
That's the modernity of GLOBSEC, so
Yeah.
please.
Well, you mentioned many things, my friend. Yes, 1 in 5 are Syrian in Jordan. I think, in all fairness, I mean, when we say the international community has to come to the rescue and to the aid of another member of the international community, we're not pointing fingers and we're not laying blame, and we're not. I mean, my good friend Stefan Fule knows exactly what we had to deal with in the early years of the waves of refugees that we were getting after the Syrian crisis erupted. We just want to work with the international community. The European Union was extremely helpful. Different individual countries and as an EU, as a commission, extremely helpful. We are now trying to talk to our European friends. Perhaps, again, I mentioned the London conference, and I think for the first time we are not looking at a donors conference when it comes to the last conference in London. We appreciate all the donors conferences that took place before, but this time it was looked at as a political conference and a way to address the question of refugees in a different way, in a more practical way. How to, use the fact that certain refugees are in certain countries, and in particular in Jordan, when it comes to our compact, how to make them benefit the local economy rather than be a burden on the national economy, and to help others to help us. One of the things we're talking to the European Union about is the relaxation of the rules of origin, for example. This will enable us to utilize Syrians in Jordan, create jobs for Jordanians to start with, but utilize also the presence of Syrians to get them to contribute to economic development by encouraging investors to come and set up businesses in Jordan. So the world has been helpful. It's just not enough. The London conference, I think, was a start in looking at this problem in a holistic manner, rather than looking at it as a country that needs help or just passing the hat around. And I think many countries realize that. So.
Well, with our eye on the time, I'm going to turn to the audience to take a few
But
questions.
I mean, if I may, sorry, on the you asked, I don't want you to think that I tried to evade answering on Turkey and the refugees. I think Europe was sympathetic before, but in the last year, Europe has felt what it's like to be at the receiving end of waves of refugees. I'm not saying that, well, we told you so. No, not at all. I think it's very, very important. When Europe faced that predicament, we certainly understood. And I think talking to each other will help us all get over this burden. And look, at the end of the day, if you look historically, if you look at the waves of refugees that leave their country or countries because of war and violence, they don't go back immediately. We know that. Right. In fact, I think the trend is 15 to 17 years. It's a harsh reality. It's a harsh fact. But you have to deal with it as such and do everything. There's no humanitarian solution to the Syrian crisis. There's a political solution that will end the humanitarian crisis or set the stage for the end of the humanitarian.
I think that's a very important point to drive that home. Let me turn, please, and please introduce yourself with the attention on time.
Thanks very much. John Jenkins, now IISS in Bahrain. Minister, nice to see you. You've just come from Istanbul. The Kurds, where do the Kurds fit into the solution on Syria? And a second question about Syria. I've just come from Tel Aviv. They're all talking about what's happening down in the south and Hawra and the Syrian Golan. What's happening down there?
I missed the second.
The Israelis that talk. I mean, the Israelis talk about their humanitarian activity, taking 500 people across for humanitarian treatment and so forth. There's more to this that's happening down there. If you could tell us.
Well, Ambassador Jenkins, when he introduced himself, says, you know, John Jenkins, IISS, sounds like 007. And I'm sure he knows the answers to both questions, but he just wants to provoke my my argument still. On the Kurds, I mean, surely in this context and in this setting, we would all agree that when you talk about Iraq, when you talk about Syria, you're talking about inclusive political processes that are needed, respecting individual and respective nationalities and as well as a presence on the ground. You see, here's the thing: Syria and Iraq are very, very similar in many ways, and I'll be very, very honest. I think the mosaic is very similar. The demography is very similar. The geography and the percentages is different. If you look at Iraq, as you know very well, sir, if you look at Iraq, you have three major blocks. You have, you know, Sunni Arabs, Sunni Kurds, and Shiites. All the other minorities, I call them that. I personally try to steer clear of calling communities minorities. I call them components, essential components, in fact, but are all small percentages. I mean, the three largest blocks are the Sunnis, Sunni Arabs, Sunni Kurds, and the Shiites. In Syria, I think the small components put together make up almost the majority versus the Sunni majority there. I mean, if you look at the two countries, very, very similar. But the difference between Syria and Iraq is that, in my opinion, it is the destruction of the structure of the state in Iraq that led to the ethnic and sectarian strife and the violence that we saw later, and the rise and spread of terrorism. In Syria, you haven't seen that. In Syria, you've seen everything else except the destruction of the structure of the state, which is where you seem to be heading if this continues. Yes, the state probably controls not much territory compared to what it did before, but at the end of the day, maybe complete lawlessness and anarchy and chaos will come about if you have a complete destruction of the structure of the state. But down south, I think that's a key triangle there, the Golan Heights and the presence of Daesh. Before that, Al-Nusra, Shuhada al-Yarmouk, as you know, humanitarian access. I mean, it's a troubled triangle down by the Golan in the first place. So we'll leave it at that.
There are a tremendous number of questions, and we just have a few minutes left. So let me turn to Milan right here, please.
Thank you, Damon. Milan Ježovica, Mesaten, Bratislava, Slovakia. Mr. Minister, as we look at the European Union and Jordan, they are both trying to be helpful. We both have accepted huge numbers of Syrians fleeing from the conflict. So we are trying to cope with our responsibility to help the people. But there is a different responsibility which lies with the Syrian regime, and that is actually to make sure that the people are not fleeing the country because of the fear of the loss of their lives. How successful are we in pinning that responsibility up on the regime in making sure that it copes with that responsibility, and what more can we do? And the second quick question, if I may.
Very quick, Milan.
Yeah. Beyond the walls of GLOBSEC, if we look at Central Europe, not too many people know, I think, about the role that Jordan is playing regionally, and about the fact that you have more than 600,000 registered refugees, and even more who are unregistered. Is there any interest of Jordan to strengthen the relationship with Central Europe? And if so, could you share with us what are you planning to do? Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, that's an important question, particularly on what can we get the Syrian regime to do and to live up to its responsibility. I think you have, again, the most important step that one can take, which includes cooperation by the Syrian regime, is to get to allow humanitarian access into Syria. And there's a host of UN Security Council resolutions when we were members of the Security Council. Resolution 2139, Resolution 2165, all to do with humanitarian access into Syria. More recently, after Resolution 2254, which set the political parameters and translated the agreement by the ISSG on the way forward. You have Resolution 2258, which talks about humanitarian access in particular. We have succeeded in the last week, by the way, with training in Jordan to airdrop humanitarian supplies into Deir ez-Zor and otherwise unreachable areas in the past. We have convoys that go by land on a daily basis, and by and large, there is, through the United Nations, contact with the Syrian regime, and there's cooperation. Of course, you have violations of these agreements every once in a while. But look, you're talking about almost 60% of the Syrian population that is either displaced within Syria or refugeed outside Syria. In the south, when people were saying, how come the numbers have gone down crossing into Jordan, we were always saying, well, there's hardly anybody left. Those who want to leave have already left, either from village to village, town to town, or across the border into Jordan. You're absolutely right. We have 1.4 million, 640,000 registered, and about 700,000 plus who were there as economic migrants and couldn't go back. So de facto refugees. At the end of the day, it's 1.4 million on Jordanian soil. Now, in terms of cooperation with Central Europe, in terms of cooperation with Europe as such, we are again in total coordination, total sync. Look, it's not a question of who has more refugees or who is bearing more of the brunt. I was once talking to my colleague, the foreign minister of Lebanon, who was saying, well, the refugees that we have in Lebanon are now 25% of the population. And I said, well, we were at 23. He said, we're at 25. I said, look, it's not a competition, but if it is a competition, I'm happy to lose it. This is not something that I want to play a game of one-upmanship on. I mean, by all means, be a larger percentage. At the end of the day, we're working together. It's not a question of who has more or who's allowing more. It's a question of how do we address the root cause of the problem so that we can stop the flow of refugees and ensure that the process of taking them back voluntarily to their countries begin.
Mr. Minister, thank you very much. We've actually only begun to scratch the surface, and it was with great regret that I won't be able to come to many of the questions that are still in the audience. But I do want to say, as we conclude this session, we will be reconvening in this room at 10:15 to continue this conversation and drilling down further on the turmoil in Syria. So for those of you who couldn't ask your questions, we'll be able to hopefully pick them up in the next session. But
I'll answer them in absentia.
Exactly. I know you've got to move on with your schedule as well, but if I could ask the audience to join me in thanking the Deputy Prime Minister for a remarkable career. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. That was terrific.
Thank you so much.